Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the podcast. Today's episode, Switch Attach. Welcome to the Deep End, our captivating discussion series where we dive into the depths of the current Pokemon news and theories, and today we're taking on the concept of the Switch 2, the potential data that we have found from different sites such as Dexerto, Reset Era, and also Games Radar. I want to take a quick second to thank our Discord moderator Nick for bringing actually this topic up to us for presentation today. Big shout out to him. He does a lot of work on our Discord, and we much appreciate him. We're going to be talking about the potential of the new system that's coming out that we're all waiting with bated breath, trying to find out what Nintendo's doing and how it's going to pertain to possibly the future of the Pokemon series. So, as of recording, we have yet to get any actual hardcore information about the Switch 2, or most likely what's been rumored to be called the Switch Attach. There are a few things, though, that we have found out. Like, number one, there most likely will be backwards compatibility, and reasons for that. They're talking about the Switch controllers, or the Switch 2 controllers, attaching via magnets this time around, which potentially may solve the drift issue. And I do believe that at some point it was revealed that the Switch 2 will have an 8-inch screen, which is the largest screen to date for any of the Switch systems.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's still called the Switch, and I feel like we're gonna get kind of more technical improvements than we're gonna see like big changes. I have difficulty imagining something that is more, in terms of the way that the Switch works, I really enjoy it. I like that we can put it into the TV and take it out and do all of these different things. So that functionality is really great, but the controllers have had a lot of issues. There's been issues with different things that shouldn't really be issues. So I'm kind of hoping that the technical aspects of it are fixed more than anything else.
If the magnetic portion of the controller is going to be true, I am definitely going to be treating that like a fidget spinner. I am going to constantly be playing around with that, I think. Just watching it just attach, to the point where I'll probably end up annoying somebody. But yeah, I think I agree with Cayla too. I think as long as the Switch 2 ends up fixing a lot of the technical issues, especially the controller problems that it'll get, or that the current Switch does get down the line, I think that'll just be great improvement for it, especially for taking it on the go, and then whatever else they can do to give it more power and everything, make it run smoother and stuff.
Quite an interesting thing, right? So if it were to attach with magnets, or the controllers, or the new Joy-Cons, whatever they decide to call them, do attach with magnets, that wouldn't necessarily get rid of stick drift, because if they wanted to go with the smaller profile Hall effect joysticks, those magnets would mess with the joysticks. So I think we'll still have the normal mechanical ones that we have now. But in terms of backwards compatibility, I think it's going to be similar to, I think it was the Nintendo DS and the 3DS, where you could still play Nintendo DS games in the 3DS, but you couldn't put the 3DS cartridges in the DS because they had that little tab on the side, if I'm remembering correctly. It's difficult to say what it could be because, there's been one standout incident, shall I say, that sort of caused a bit of controversy, if I'm phrasing that correctly. The Wii was quite a popular console. Then the Wii U came out after that, and they kind of messed it up. So it wasn't as popular. I think my biggest fear is that happening again, where they try and go too gimmicky, and it ends up just crashing and burning.
Honestly, a lot of my fellows are covering the points. Cayla basically talking about how it's going to be a technical increase. There was a lot of rumors that along the community for Switch Pro in the past, and just rumors that get so big, companies have to pay some sort of attention to, and I think just giving us better hardware is going to be the goal here. Maybe VR, AR sort of interface, and that would be really cool if instead of just maybe in handheld mode, you can use different AR features where they're going to have some sort of stand-in for that when it's in a dock mode, or maybe they're going to have certain games that are going to require you to switch between handheld and dock mode to perform different tasks in them. That'd be a really cool idea. On the topic of the magnetic attach thing, there was actually a patent that I remember hearing about before the Switch even came out about how the rail system was originally supposed to be magnetic connectors, but then that interfered, like Chase pointed out, with the scratch pad interface that they use for the Joy-Cons. That made me think that the rumor about the Switch attach being magnetic might not actually be about the way the Joy-Cons attach to the console itself, but more the technology that they're going to use to get around this Joy-Con drift issue instead of a little scratch pad that continues to relay when it's worn down. It'll be more of a magnetic reference system.
Yeah, one of the things that I kind of keep thinking about when I hear the magnetic attachments for the Joy-Cons is if they're attached magnetically, you're going to have a problem where if you apply enough force, you're going to break that connection. And now you've got this screen that is free falling. And that kind of bothers me a little bit. So there has to be some kind of safety feature that prevents the controllers from sliding out of the screen if they're going to continue how the Switch worked versus what the new Switch 2 is. The other concern that I have is more along the lines of if you're using a strong enough magnet where you require a bit of force to remove that, what is that going to do with the internal guts at some point? Because I know magnets will start interfering with certain electronics if they're strong enough. So where's the give and take point in that if that's the case? As far as the rest of the stuff goes, there's the 8-inch screen, which honestly is going to be impressive. Seeing that, I do enjoy playing the Switch on handheld mode, but I do play mostly docked. But having that 8-inch screen is going to be much more beneficial, I think, in the long terms for playing handheld. One of the more interesting things, one of the things that people don't realize about the Nintendo game cards is that a lot of them actually aren't even being utilized to their fullest extent. So the cards that were developed by Micronix, and they've got the chips already built. They've paid for, they're well and done. And the card that they're using for the Switch comes, as far as I know, comes in as high as 32 gigs, but I believe they do have a 64 gig chip as well. And that would allow for games like Elden Ring to be played. Now, obviously, Elden Ring is not in the Switch currently, because I'm assuming the hardware issues prevent it from being playable on that system. But what if they're going to repurpose those chips for the next gen system so that they can be played? You can easily put Elden Ring on a 64-bit chip, I believe.
Even as you were saying it, I thought that was very parallel to what Chase brought up, where the difference between the DS and the 3DS, it was the exact same cartridge, but with one little plastic blob on it that prevented it from going into the old school slot. They could do the exact same thing, use the same sort of shape cartridge. They're already seem to push this as a Switch successor rather than a whole new next generation sort of idea. I think that would actually be right in line with what we're seeing coming up.
Honestly, I don't think the issue is with the cartridges themselves. I think, you can put some pretty big games on there. A lot of games that have better compression, whatever you want to do. But I think no matter what internals they use for the cartridges, if the Switch successor is as underpowered as the Switch is, comparatively, it still wouldn't be in Nintendo's best interest to try and fill those cards up as much as possible, try and get some of the bigger, better, more popular titles from other studios onto what's going to be this new next-gen version of the Switch, because the read and write speeds of the Switch are still going to be relatively low, and there's still going to be a bottleneck there.
Backwards compatibility is always a great thing to have. If the new Switch comes out with that function, that'd be great. That's probably the best thing that everybody can at least try to hope for. And then X and Chase also brought up too, the whole DS to 3DS thing. Yeah, there's ways they can do stuff like that too, right? So that you don't just pop in that card into your old Switch or something.
Yeah, I'm thinking about backwards compatibility as well. I'm wondering for games, especially of course Pokemon games, Scarlet and Violet had some issues with the amount of data it could store, especially Pokemon that would load in, to the point that shiny hunters a lot of times will save before they start looking for spawns and then restart their game because it'll make it load. Pokemon will actually spawn in a way that's easier to see. shouldn't be part of like typical gameplay. So I'm hoping that whatever changes they make, because we suspect that it's going to be backwards compatible, that those changes will improve previous games too, because there's a lot of good things about SV, and those technical aspects just kind of keep it from being the best that it could be.
Something you brought up about the compression of the chips and the graphics power. Now, to start, we know that from reviews that the Pokemon team got together with the Zelda team. They're in the same building. And if you look at the specs between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they managed to utilize a new compression system that effectively let them triple this usable space inside of the game, inside the cards. And I believe, so Tears of the Kingdom was over 16 gigs in size, where Breath of the Wild was about 14.4, but anybody who's played that game knows how massive that underground zone was. I mean, it was the size of the main map in Hyrule. And so the fact that to throw a full-on secondary map in about 2 gigabytes worth of space is incredible. Not to mention the fact that you also had the Sky Zone, all of the enemies that you were encountering. So they managed to put a whole lot in those 2 games. That being said, if they were able to apply that particular compression rate to the existing cards, we might actually be able to see some top tier games. And as far as graphic power goes, something that I'm remembering from, I believe it was the Games Conference last year, the year before, the guys who run Call of Duty had basically openly stated that future games will be coming to the Switch day and date, so on release, as expected. And so if someone is going to play Call of Duty and they're used to playing it on the PlayStation 4 or on the Xbox, they're going to expect the same kind of graphics fidelity and performance on the Switch. Now, we all know that the Switch has had issues with performance, which is why games like Wolfenstein has to be watered down so that they remain playable. This, to me, kind of was a silent wink that the next system, whatever it's called, Switch 2, Switch Attached, Super Switch, take your pick, would have a graphics card that is on par with the PlayStation 4 or the new Xbox. I don't know if they're going to be in the position to rival the PlayStation 5. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to see something with the graphics power to rival the 5, but it's going to be up there. As a matter of fact, there is an article here by Eurogamer that was written back in November where they're speculating that the new cards being used in the Switch Attach is something akin to the NVIDIA's RTX 30 series, which the 30 cards are really good as far as gaming goes. And they're also talking about ray tracing and all this, and if they've got a comparable chip going into the Switch 2, I think we're going to be seeing the potential of getting these end-tier games inside the new Switch. And being the fact that we're talking also about the fact that we've got cards that haven't been used, knowing this particular information, like, what do you think are the potentials for seeing some of these more current games with these expansive graphics and huge sizes appearing on the Switch on an actual physical card? What are you guys' thoughts on that? I mean, could you imagine a Pokemon game that is 3 times the size of Scarlet and Violet?
At that point, put in all the regions, right?
True.
It's interesting that you mentioned Call of Duty, because Call of Duty is a horrendously big game. I mean, it's like a 500 gig game. So I think if they were to bring it to Switch, like just as an example, they would do what they did with Resident Evil Village, where it'll be cloud play. So, I mean, hopefully they do away with it, and then the guys who make COD get their stuff together and they actually compress the game, so you don't only have one game on your console. But in terms of using it for Pokemon, it would be interesting to see how they go, or how they do with it, because I mean, the recent games that have come out, they have been very buggy and, you know, they don't run the greatest. So I mean, if that's what's needed to just kick up the quality a little bit and bring a better sort of experience to the game, I think I would enjoy seeing that. Definitely make it a lot more fun to play.
I don't really know coding quite well, but to my perspective / imagination, I would see compressing a code much like zipping a file. Like, you have to undo that now to change things. Does working with this compressed maybe technology or approach, does that make it harder to fix or update little things after the game's release? Okay, so the hole that I'm putting at is if the Pokemon Company can't figure out how to make a truly complete game that doesn't have all these glitches and they start compressing all this, isn't that just going to lead to more problems in coding and the interactions of the programs when you don't have a complete game?
It's actually not the easiest thing to explain. It isn't necessarily compressing it. I mean, it is to an extent, but it's also how everything is loaded in. If you look at a lot of games, so especially your first-person stuff, it deloads the stuff behind you, just out of what would be render distance, and it loads stuff further in front of you. And a lot of your enemies in that, or mobs or whatever it is, are actually under the ground, well, under what would be the ground. And once you reach a trigger point, they essentially teleport to where they're supposed to be and map to be. A lot of it comes down to that, and how well they're able to do that, how clean your code is. Because if you've got a lot of fluff in there, then that slows everything down.
I appreciate that because I'm sure some viewers are going to be not as keen on that in the same way that I wasn't. But that's actually a really interesting way, because maybe that'll actually let them make a more concise game. But I don't see them being this big, ambitious, even though they're using that word for Pokemon CA, where they're going to try to use the full capabilities of this chip, because they're not really at a point where they have to, because the success of the franchise, and they're not really successful at dealing with what they already have on the smaller scale.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with, like, it is the biggest multimedia franchise. So I think it comes down to being too big to fail. So regardless of what happens, like, I'm just using a Pokemon for example, I think it would take an extremely buggy or broken game to actually get people to not buy and at least try out the games.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think most people are going to buy Pokemon games when they come out. So it's hard because, like, you want Nintendo to be, and the Pokemon Company and everybody involved to put as much effort as possible into their Pokemon games because we love them, we care about them. But from a business side, it makes sense that they kind of play with that a little bit. Although I feel like Pokemon Legends Arceus did pretty well from a technological standpoint, so hopefully Legends ZA is using more of that as a background. I feel like Pokemon a lot of times tries to reinvent the wheel when they're creating each of their games instead of building off of the code that they already have. So it would be really nice if they use Pokemon Legends Arceus and the code within that when they're developing ZA instead of reinventing the wheel.
I think if anything, for sure, I don't think we'll ever get rid of like day one patches, regardless of like if we get like a new Switch, like when the new Switch comes out as well, right? Like I was just thinking about like that whole like compression thing and whatnot, and it's like I think that's still not going to stop us from getting like some kind of day one patch too, you know, like for I mean that probably falls for more than just Pokemon, honestly. But other than that, yeah, I mean, if they use this new card or whatever to like help improve it by that long shot, or then I mean I'm all for it. Will they be able to do it? I don't know. I mean, they, like what everybody else is saying so far, yeah, it's probably one of those things where like, does the Pokemon Company care that much in order to reach that kind of technological aspect or improvement? Or like, you know, maybe they will listen to the fan base. Who knows?
I will refrain from putting on my tinfoil hat at the moment because I've already, on a recent episode, you and I, Guren, have discussed that particular issue I have with the day one patches. So I'm just gonna let that one just slide right now.
I was over here just freaking out over the idea of day one pass. I have a lot of video game collector friends. Day one pass absolutely ruins video game collecting. Once they don't have that online shop anymore, you are all bricking your game. Worst choice for any collection ever.
Now, I'm going to address an elephant in the room, and this is the issue that I'm having. Now, if they go with the name Switch 2, Super Switch, yeah, it's going to trigger that whole, hey, I like the Switch. The Super Switch sounds like it's going to be a better system, or the Switch 2 sounds like it's going to be a much better, you know, an upgrade to the original console. Great. However, I think if they go with if the rumor is true and the system is called the Switch Attach, we're gonna have the problem that we had with the Wii U, where the marketing was so bad that system failed because nobody understood that it was its own separate system and that it wasn't some kind of a weird attachment for the Wii itself. And even, I mean, I don't know where everybody was in that time frame, but me as an adult, I was sitting there and I'm watching the commercials and I'm like, I had to wait for that system to drop to understand that it in itself was a separate system. And I own one. I think I'm one of the few people that actually bought into one of them, and it had a great library, it had a great set of games. However, because of the poor naming convention and the shoddy marketing, it did not sell as well as it could have. And I'm afraid that with the term Switch attach, we're gonna have that same exact issue. But I mean, that could just be me.
As long as like whatever it's called and it has like some kind of new function or gimmick or something, maybe it's going to be a little bit more usable, because I'm still looking at like the Nintendo 3DS. It's like I barely use that 3D function at all whatsoever. And like the Nintendo 2D, it was basically the 3DS, but they removed the 3D function for it. I was like, as long as they don't do something like that, then I think it's going to be okay. Otherwise, yeah, here's the hope, and like at least the system's a little bit more powerful and just runs things a lot more smoother.
I was also one of the people who had a Wii U, and I think I played it for about a month because I actually couldn't figure out how you're supposed to actually use it. There needs to be something that, differentiates the Switch to its successor. Maybe it might not be a Switch anything. It might get a new, maybe not so completely different name. Maybe something that invokes the same gimmick like the Switch's name did. I mean, you can switch it between handheld and dock mode. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. Marketing wise, I hope they do a better job than they did with like the Wii U. For example, like you said, Draco, because that was abysmal. And I mean, I was, how old when that thing came out? It was 2012. I was 14.
So, big question here. The Switch attach was something that we saw pop up on YouTube and through some other things, but a lot of times they use code words for projects and stuff like that. But also, what if that's a mistranslation? What if it was another Japanese word that's very similar, and that's what whoever got it landed on, and that what is what passed through? Otherwise, like, I'd really like the idea of them, because the Switch is very popular. The idea that you can be on the TV and say your sibling comes in, like, I want to watch this. Well, okay, I don't have to quit my game. I can just continue in handheld. And I don't think they want to throw that away, especially because Nintendo over the years has been the handheld kings with Game Boys and everything all the way through. Any other company that tried to get into it, it was very short-lived. I don't really see the Switch attach, like you said. It implies that it's an additional thing, much like PlayStation Move or something very much along those lines, where it's just going to be an enhancement to what we already have, instead of something like the Switch Exchange, where it implies there's something greatly different about this that you got to check out, other than just being a Switch or an addition to the Switch.
Yeah, I'm thinking especially about the audience that's younger, who relies on their parents to buy them hardware. They're gonna need, because that's a significant portion of the people who play these games. Like, we always think about it from our perspective and like are like, oh yeah, like we're looking at different features. But for a kid to convince their parents, like, it might be tough. So I think realistically, like, kids will need to see games that they can only play on this new system in order to convince their parents to buy them this new system. So we'll have to see exactly how that works with this, and if there's going to be some big enough games on the new console to make it worth buying. Like, a lot of Switches were bought during the pandemic, so it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Especially too, thinking about how the Switch was a pretty expensive console compared to like Game Boys. So that's also very interesting to see if parents will be willing to put that kind of money into it.
It's funny you should bring that up. I actually totally forgot to, but the rumored price point for this new system is somewhere in the vein of about $400, which is gonna put it smack between the PlayStation and the Xbox. And I have to give credit to Commonwealth Games, because I was catching one of their videos and they had mentioned the price point. And you saying how, you're right. We are looking at it from our point of view, where we're adults, we have our jobs where we can afford to splurge on this, but where parents are concerned with younger kids, a $400 price point is a significant amount of money for a system, and then that may or may not include a game. In which case, what are your thoughts on the potential of that being the price point for this new system?
Sorry, I'm having trouble finding my wallet. I think it started running away after we were talking about the pricing, I think. But no, for real though, I think most of the time the prices are more or less the same when it comes to hardware here. Maybe it's just like a slight difference just because of like the whole like the importing taxes or something. I gotta agree with like what's been put out by you guys too already. Like it, for us, like people that have like that are working, like we'll definitely like splurge some money to try and at least save up for the system and buy it and whatnot. But then when you're looking at like the children that do want to have it to play whatever comes out on the system or just to have it, then yeah, that's gonna be like a big problem, especially for like a household that probably has like multiple kids too, right? It's like, oh no, if we buy one, then we have to buy the other one also, because like that's because you're looking at like what, like 2-kid household would be like what, that's like $800 at that point, and that's
probably closer to $1,000 once you factor in for,
with
the games.
Yeah, so it's like, whew, oh man.
I was thinking about my like younger relatives. I have a huge family, and so there's a bunch of like little kids. And at a family gathering, I was talking to two of the kids who are brothers, and they have one Switch between the two of them. They are never able to battle each other in Pokemon because they only have one Switch. But realistically, their parents can't afford to buy 2 Switches. Like that's very expensive for like a kid to play on. But like back when I was a kid, I remember having a Game Boy for myself and a Game Boy for my brother, and we would battle all the time. So like that's how I got into battling for the first time. So I wonder how that's going to impact the future of Pokemon and the future of Nintendo video games.
Growing up as an only child, I am amazed that I did not even consider that is a huge drawback to the Switch being also a handheld. Is now you can't get away with just having a family entertainment system. The Switch has become a very personal thing, and I never considered that before.
Firstly, I'm just going to lead off with, I don't know if you guys ever, or well, I'm sure you guys did have DSs because you were Pokemon fanatics. And I don't know if you knew of or made use of the feature. So my brother and I used to do this a lot. So my brother would have a game, I think it was one of the Super Mario games on the DS, but even if it wasn't in my DS, we could still play that same game if we were close enough together. I feel like that feature should make a return, because it makes it a lot easier if you are in a situation where, maybe you can afford to buy each kid, let's say you have 2 kids, you can buy each kid a Switch, but also games these days are very expensive, so if you're buying 2 of the same game every time, that starts to rack up, and that's a lot of money. So I'd like to see that feature make a return. Also, $400 Freedom Dollars is actually the current price of a Switch here where I am now. Where I live, rather, shall I say. So if that is the price, and you know what, it converts to being the same price as what it is now, I'll be very happy. Although I can see it being a bit more, especially with how beefy this new Switch is going to have to be to keep up with the demands of current day games.
If you're talking about the current standard Switch being $400 for you, then the conversion for a $400 price point for us versus you would be double that. So you're looking at $800.
I shall not swear. This is inappropriate.
Yeah, it is absolutely wild, but at the same time, I can also understand. I think that's one of the things that has held Nintendo back for the last several consoles, is that in trying to price something that is reasonable for most people, they've had to cut somewhere, and it's usually at the cost of performance via graphics or just overall performance on the system. which unfortunately we're getting to a point where the games are suffering. We could visibly see the game suffering, trying to run on a system that isn't capable of handling all of the information that's stored on those cards. So them cranking out a system that can do on par with some of the other console systems, I mean, they're going to have to sacrifice something. And yeah, again, that $400 price point is insane, but understandable as well, if that rumor price tag is to be believed.
Going back to the card thing, maybe I mean, for like the game card itself, if it gets bigger, especially for Pokemon, I mean, totally different topic in a sense, but maybe they can finally add some voice acting.
I think I've given up on that train. I think I've given up on that train.
If they're focusing on more emotionally invoking stories, which is a very small rumor I've come through the, 2 cups and string line that is the Pokemon rumor mill right now, they're actually, voice acting is going to be required. If you really want, think about the whole thing with Arvin and everything. Like, it was almost awkward in the fact that we didn't have it. The end scene after the DLC where, I just had her name on the tip of my tongue.
Prior.
No sound whatsoever. Just dead air.
I think, too, if they want to continue doing these complex stories and complex lore, because, I talk about this a lot, but they're incorporating, theoretical physics and also potentially all these, metaphysical things. And, if they want their audience to pay attention to the story, they need to include voice acting, because most people are just totally skipping it. And then they go to talk about the lore and they have no idea what they just played.
You're going to start needing advanced college degrees to play Pokemon games.
If you want to deep dive into some of the lore, I love the Pokemon narrative because on the surface it's all, sugar and sprinkles. But every layer you go down in trying to figure out the history and stuff and how it parallels the real world, there's a lot of twisted and dark things that take place in the Pokemon world. It just has this magical, light, anime happiness that prevents a swarm of Beedrill from just massacring everyone.
So one of the last things I want to touch on before we end this episode is that they're talking about natively 4K graphics coming out off of the system when it's docked. I'm not entirely sure if they said handheld or not, but there was the thought of 4K coming out. And so imagine, if you will, we just got the first taste, finally, after so many years, of Metroid Prime 4. Imagine if the title drops and it was Metroid Prime 4K.
They've done that with the 3D stuff a lot.
They did. They absolutely did. But the potential of a 4K Pokemon game, I mean, that would be really interesting, but would that require them having to rebuild everything all over again? I think, honestly, they could get away with just a retexture, but I'm not as well versed in that particular aspects of animation anymore. I think Chase would be the closest person to really talk about that would be the best person to actually comment on that one.
That's quite a leap, because it's not just a retexture. It would have to be a whole different sort of file system, because those files in 4K files are extremely big, and if you can't bring that size down effectively, it's going to look like taking a 480p image and scaling it up to like 4K or 1080. It's going to look not necessarily pixelated, but there's going to be something wrong with it that you can visually see, but you can't actually put your finger on it.
Like playing Super Mario 3 on a 4K TV.
Exactly the same thing.
Got it.
That's another concern that I have with calling Metroid 4, or as the example, Metroid 4K, because it really just sounds like it's a remaster of the graphics then.
I just want to touch on quickly, I can't remember if this specific console could output to a TV, but how have we not, in this whole conversation, not mentioned that the PS Vita was the Switch before the Switch, because it had cartridges of similar style, and what it is very similar to what the Switch is. I don't know about if it could connect to an external display or not. I'm a bit fuzzy on that.
Via the PlayStation 4, I believe it could interact with it, so you needed both consoles to do what the Switch does.
Oh, so it was a GameCube and a Switch and a GBA all in one.
I never owned one, so I couldn't tell you. I had no point of reference.
I mean, it wasn't the greatest, I'll be completely honest. There's a reason why it didn't have a very long lifespan, partly due to the hardware and partly due to an unavailability of games. I just wanted to touch on that just real quick and then just mention or use as an example of how Nintendo has a way of making their consoles work really well, but I use really well in a loose term. I'm looking at you, Wii U. They do have this thing where they can make almost anything work.
I mean, they made nunchucks work.
Hey, listen, we all like nunchucks. We all want to be ninjas.
Well, I mean, if you want to take stock, I mean, in the lifespan of Nintendo, they have, like you said, they have cornered the market for handhelds. And the Switch was the absolutely best thing that they could have dropped. It was lightning in a bottle. To point out the fact, in my lifetime, we have had, and this is all the non-Nintendo handhelds that I am aware of. You had the TurboGrafx Turbo Express, which used the same cards as the home system. You had the Sega Game Gear, which chewed through batteries like they were candy. Then you had the Sega Nomad, which was an attempt to copy what the TurboGrafx Express was doing, where you could take Genesis games and play them on the go on the Nomad. You had the PSP, which is the system I bought for one specific RPG title, and I ended up trading all that away. You had the PlayStation Vita, which was the second attempt at Sony for a handheld, which honestly I don't know anybody who ever owned one or bought into one of those. And I feel like I'm missing another handheld that was absolutely short-lived. Which one?
The Steam Deck, sir. The newest one.
The Steam Deck's is the newest one, and I think that's the only one that's even having any kind of success, but that's because it's double backing on the fact that you can play the same games that you've already owned on Steam, correct?
Yeah, I don't own one, but yeah.
Yeah, and you still require internet for that. You still got to download your game onto it, right? You can't just take it around and just start playing any random old game.
Oh, you can play them you can use them offline, but I will say, okay, firstly, Switch has been around for, 7 years now? For them to be able to keep selling these in the quantity that they are is quite a feat in and of itself. But what I will say about the Steam Deck is I think Steam Deck's popularity is mainly because they were the first handheld gaming computer, quote unquote. But now you've got other manufacturers who are taking that concept and doing better, and even people building their own who can replicate like Steam Deck quality. So what I would say is the Steam Deck to the other handhelds is what the Switch is to the Xbox or the PlayStation.
I'm just thinking of the impact of the pandemic on sales of game consoles, because the way that it peaked for this system is it looks like it's just very different from other systems. So I'm just like, oh, that's fascinating. But yeah, I'm just nerding out over data over here, so it's fine.
And with that said, brings our episode to a close. What are your thoughts about the rumors of the Switch 2 or the Switch Attach? Some of the other topics that we've touched about with the hardware specs, the software specs, the problems that we've seen, or anything else that might have come up your way. Let us know down below, and also be sure to share, like, and subscribe. Tell us how we're doing. Thanks, X and Cayla, for joining us today.
Switch 2, cha-cha-cha. Switch 2, cha-cha-cha.
And as always, have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Mr. Nick.
Bye-bye.
Bye.